Continuing long-term memory notes. Other factors affecting retrieval. Encoding specificity principle. The more closely the retrieval clues match the way informed was encoded, the better the information will be remembered. So this is like, think about like a Google search, right? The better or more accurate you are in what you type into Google, the more likely you are to get your results. Same thing when you're encoding something. So when you're trying to retrieve something from your memory, the closer it is of what you're trying to think about, the more likely you are to retrieve it. Mood congruent memory. So this is similar to that state dependent memory we talked about before, but a little bit different. Another good vocab word to remember. So this is a theory which says we tend to selectively remember memories that match or are congruent with our current mood. So it has an effect on how people are treated for medical conditions. When you're depressed, you remember other depressing times. When you're angry with your significant other, you start to remembering past issues that you have had with him or her. So if anyone's ever been in a relationship, you guys are kind of young, but you maybe you get in an argument with your significant other, and then they start bringing up every because they're angry, so now they remember every other memory from when they were angry with you before, right? That's mood congruent memory. It also works positively as well. So like, let's say the first time you ever fall in love, right? Now you're going to remember, and you're happy. Now you remember all these happy memories. So it works both ways. Memory construction. We often construct our memories as we encode them, and we may also alter our memories as we withdraw them. So we infer our past from stored information and what we assume. By filtering information and filling in missing pieces, our schemas, which is our understanding of specific settings, direct our memory construction. So this goes with that misinformation we were talking about a little bit before. So as your memories come in, but as they come out, as you retrieve them, right, they might be altered a little bit, right? They might get mixed up with other memories. So misinformation. So like I was saying, this is what this leads into. As memory fades with time following an event, the injection of misinformation becomes easier. So the longer you have this memory, the more likely some type of misinformation, some type of other memory might get mixed in with it a little bit. So the misinformation effect, like we talked about before, is incorporating misleading information into one's memory of an event. So imagination inflation occurs because visualizing something and actually perceiving it activate similar brain areas. So when you imagine something happening, you're using the same part of the brain um, from when you actually perceived it to happen. So that's why these two different memories get mixed up. Same thing with like the dreams, because you're using similar parts of your brain, the memories get confused, and that's where the misinformation comes in. So, like for example, for the car accident, right? Loftus and Palmer did a famous study where they, had people watch a car accident and they used different words. So they used leading questions. So one was asked, did the car smash into the other one? And when they used the word smash, so the top right, this is the actual accident right here. And this is what eyewitness, constructed. But when they asked the leading question, like, "Oh, did you see the cars smash into each other?" This is what the people thought happened. So just by using different wordings, so kind of like priming, that can mess with your mind a little bit, and you get misinformation. So smash makes it think like it was like it was a worse accident than it actually was. Repressed memories, we talked about this before, one of Freud's defense mechanisms. So during the 1990s, the idea of repressing painful memories became a big topic. So while some psychoanalysts still support the idea of repressed memories, most psychologists agree that events that are traumatic are typically etched on the mind as vivid, persistent, haunting memories, right? So they're more of a flashbulb memory than repressed memories. Forgetting. So as you know, not all the information you learn will stick in your brain. According to Daniel Schachter, this is the result of one of the 7 sins of memory. So you'll remember that name Schachter, right? So that's going to be one of our theories of emotion as well. So we're going to go over all 7 of these sins of memory. So the first one, transience, is the impermanence of long-term memories based on the idea that memories gradually fade in strength over time, also known as the decay theory. Right? So for most memories, there's a sharp decline in memory followed by declining rates of loss. So this is Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. So you forget things right away, but then over time, you tend to remember most things, but some things do fall out of your memory and you don't remember them anymore. That's called the decay theory. So, some things gradually fall out. Once it's usually long-term memory, it's usually there. Some things do gradually fall out. The second sin of memory is absent-mindedness. All right, so absent-mindedness is forgetting caused by just lapses in attention, right? Forgetting where you parked or losing your keys. So I know a lot of people like this, right? So you parked somewhere and you go, maybe you're in a hurry to get in the store, so you weren't paying attention where you parked and you can't find your car, or losing your keys. All right, so my wife always loses her keys. I'm like, just put it in the same spot and you won't lose it. But she just puts it somewhere and she doesn't remember. I mean, I have literally bought her like a key finder. Her parents have bought her a key finder. She's bought herself a key finder, and nothing seems to work. So a lot of times you forget because you just don't pay attention. Or, not to pick on my wife, but like when she cleans, a lot of times she puts things away. I'm like, okay, where'd you push? She's like, I don't know, right? So she's a one-track minded person where it's just I gotta clean, but she's not paying attention to where she actually puts things, right? So then she doesn't remember where it is. The third sin of memory is blocking. So blocking is forgetting when a memory cannot be retrieved because of interference. So this goes back to that proactive and retroactive interference we talked about before. So remember, if you can remember the acronym PORN, you can remember this. So proactive interference is when an old memory disrupts the learning and remembering of a new memory. So an example of this is trying to put the dishes away at a new house. So remember PO, so old information interrupts new information. So when you're trying to put away dishes at your new house, you keep remembering where you had them at your old house. So you get confused, or maybe you can't find where you put the bowls or something like that. Retroactive memory is when a new memory blocks the retrieval of an old memory. So an example of this could be driving an automatic after driving a manual. So, a manual is the stick shift. I think they barely make those cars anymore. But, the old can the new information can interrupt the old memory. So if you drive an automatic, then you forget how to drive a manual, which I've only done very few times, and I wouldn't remember how to do it anymore because it's been so long. Serial position effect. So the serial position effect is a form of interference related to the sequence in which material is presented. And so this is a continuance of like the interference. So generally items in the middle are remembered less. So if we were in class and we did a little short-term memory activity where I would ask you 12 words and then see how many you can remember, most students tend to remember the first words and the last words, and then anything else would be random if it struck an emotion, if it was emotional, or it stuck out for some reason, like maybe that was just on your mind for something. So the first things you tend to remember, that's primacy, relative ease in remembering the first information in a series. So if I was to list off 12 words to you, most people would remember the first couple words I said. That's called the primacy effect. All right, it's called the primacy effect. The recency effect is strong memories of the most recent information in the series. So people tend to remember the first words I said of the 12 and the last words I said. So the first words I said would be the primacy effect. You tend to remember the last words. That's the recency effect. So the information in the middle is exposed to both retroactive and proactive interference. So you tend not to remember the words in the middle. Once again, unless it strikes some kind of emotion or you just happen to connect to that word for whatever reason. Just like when we talked about change blindness and how the people couldn't tell the people who like hid behind the counter and then came up from the counter, unless you happen to be paying attention to like their shirt or you thought they were cute or something like that. So we see this is a serial position effect. So the same thing like those 12 words that were spoken. So the red would be the immediate, like us doing in class, you tend to remember the first things, and the last things. But long term, so if I was to ask you later on, the primacy effect long term is better. So if I ask you those words right in class, the recency effect, you tend to have, most people can remember the last word you just heard. But long term, you tend to remember the first words that you heard. The fourth sin is misattribution. Misattribution is memory faults that occur when memories are retrieved but are associated with the wrong time, place, or person. So example, psychologist Donald Thompson was accused of rape. His alibi was airtight as he was giving a TV interview the victim had been watching just prior to the assault. So the victim could picture the guy, right? So she knew his face, but she couldn't remember from where. So she had accused him of rape, but really it's because she had just seen his face on TV. And so this happens all the time, where we might think of something, oh, like, weren't you there with us when that happened? And the person might, no, I wasn't there at all. It's just because, you did this with that person, but maybe just not at that time. The fifth one is suggestibility. The process of memory distortion as a result of deliberate or inadvertent suggestion. So eyewitness accounts are a large part of our legal system. Unfortunately, they can be incredibly faulty. With the misinformation effect, memories can be embellished or even created by cues and suggestions. So if you've ever seen, like, there used to be a show called The Mentalist where he used to suggest, he said he wasn't a psychic, but he could kind of suggest and make people kind of do things based off suggestion. And we see this with the Ronald Cotton story, right? How eyewitnesses can be led, and that's why they've been changed. So we don't, you have to rely on eyewitness accounts to some extent, but especially with like certain high profile type cases like rape and murder, hopefully you have DNA to go along with it or other evidence, because as we see, the misinformation effect can happen even when you're not trying it, to make it happen. But different things can change your mind just by leading questions, like we saw with the car crash. But if you, like we saw in the Ronald Khan story, if she points out that person and the cop says, "Oh yeah, that's who I think it was too," now you become more confident. And if you pick the same person out of the lineup, now you're really confident. So before, when you might think this is the person, now you keep getting all these, "Oh yeah, that's who we think it is. Oh yeah, that's the same person again." So now you're really confident, and so now you see that picture on the page or in the police lineup, and now that's where the misinformation effect comes. That's where now you see his face in the reality of what really happened, right? So Jennifer Thompson was saying, she saw Ron Khan's face as the person who had raped her. Even though she knew, even when she found out it wasn't him, she still pictured his face, right? Because that's the whole misinformation effect, where you get different memories blend together. Number 6 is bias. Bias is the influence of personal beliefs, attitudes, and experiences on memory. So as we've talked about, there's tons of different types of biases out there. So a couple main ones that mess up our memory are expectancy bias, which is a memory tendency to distort recalled events to fit one's expectations. So when you expect certain things to happen, that's how you kind of reconstruct your memory. Like if you expected the man to be the aggressor, maybe when the cop or someone asks you to recall what happened, maybe you're going to have the man being the aggressor because that's what you expected to happen. Self-consistency bias is a commonly held idea that we are more consistent in our attitudes and beliefs over time than we actually are. So you tend to think maybe the way you think now, oh, you've always thought that way, when that might not be the case. Right? We tend to think we always think kind of how we think, but we change. And the last one, number 7, is persistence. Persistence, a memory problem where unwanted memories cannot be put out of our mind. So depressed people cannot stop thinking about how bad their life is and how unhappy they are. It can create a self-fulfilling problem. All right, depression, you get into that cycle. You're depressed, so you start thinking about depressing, other memories, which then leads you to become more depressed. So if someone tells you don't think about something, what are you going to do? You're going to think about it. And so then that can affect your other memories. So psychologists think that emotions strengthen the physical changes in the synapses that hold our memories. Thus, highly emotional memories can be harder to put out of our mind, right? So that goes back to that memory trace that we were talking about before. And the last slide for long-term memory is forgetting isn't all bad, right? So according to Schachter, the seven sins are actually a normal part of human memory and are the results of adaptive features in our memory. So, we don't most people in the world don't have photographic memory, right? So, we're kind of meant to forget these things. So we talked about people who have photographic memories, they have that enzyme that doesn't kind of erase that, I don't want to say meaningless information, but the stuff that isn't important. They don't have that enzyme, so that's why they retain most things that they see. But if you remember, their short-term memory is just as good as ours. But once they get to their long-term memory, it's kind of there forever. Where we have these sins of forgetting, um, so our memories don't get too clogged. So, Schachter says that each of the sins is for a reason. So transience is to prevent memory overload. That's that decay theory. Blocking is to focus on task at hand. All right, so it blocks other things out so you can focus on what you need to. Absent-mindedness, the ability to shift attention. Misattribution, bias, and suggestibility. We have that to focus on meaning and not the details of things. So, we've talked about this before. If we were in class, I'd have everyone draw a penny. No one can draw a penny exactly. That's because you just need to know, our memories work where you just need to know enough details to know what it is. So you know enough details to know what a penny is. Not necessarily, most people know who's drawn on it, but what way he's facing all the different letters and words and dates and all the other stuff on a penny. You know just enough to be able to tell, hey, that's a penny and it's worth 1 cent. And then the last thing is persistence is to remember especially emotional memories. So each of these sins, these are some of the reasons why we forget, but it's also, could be considered a good thing, so our minds don't get overloaded.